22 women, all massage therapists, accuse Watson of sexual misconduct during massage appointments.
New developments in the sexual misconduct allegations against Deshaun Watson.
The women decided to show up because they were called liars by Deshaun Watson's attorneys in the response to their allegations against the quarterback.
NFL quarterback Deshaun Watson suspended for 6 games following dozens of allegations of sexual misconduct.
But how did this once famed quarterback from Clemson and rising star in the NFL turn so dark and fall into the deep, dark depths of such predatory claims that would alter his image and legacy forever? On the surface, it may look like harsh accusations and then improper punishment handed down by the NFL.
Here's the problem. I think a lot of people don't like the end result, the verdict. But if you read the 15 pages, you see how she came to this conclusion.
But there are so many more layers to this case that make it so much more complex and tough to understand in the controversial fall of Deshaun Watson. After being named the best quarterback in the nation at Clemson 2 years in a row now, and was fresh off of beating the Goliath of Alabama in the college football playoffs, he had almost achieved everything on his college dreams checklist. Next on his journey was the NFL, where things would begin to get dark. Going into the draft, there wasn't really talk about Watson being the first quarterback taken off the board, and although to this day has some of the best quarterbacks in the league from this draft in Mahomes and Lamar, Mitchell Trubisky was the first quarterback taken, and Watson would fall to the Texans, who were in need of a quarterback after just shipping out Brock Osweiler in a salary dump trade with the Browns. During his rookie season, although he didn't start the game, he would get the nod halfway through the week 1 game versus the Jags, and he threw his first NFL touchdown. His rookie season was filled with many ups and downs, but would conclude once he tore his ACL in a practice in the beginning of November, would end his rookie campaign. His second season in the NFL would be a memorable one though. In the season opener on September 9th against the New England Patriots, Watson returned from the injury and threw for 176 yards and a touchdown and interception, and rushed for 40 yards as the Texans lost again, 27-20. But more injuries followed, and after suffering broken ribs and a partially collapsed lung, Watson had to take a 12-hour bus ride from Houston to Jacksonville for a Week 7 game against the Jaguars, rather than flying because of the fears about the effects of air pressure on his chest. Watson finished his second regular season with a career-high 4,165 passing yards, 26 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, as Houston went on to win the AFC South title with an 11-5 record. And in 2020, Watson only got better, while leading the 10-6 Texans into the wildcard round versus the Buffalo Bills. Watson led the Texans back from a 16-0 deficit to win 22-19 in overtime. In the divisional round against the Chiefs, the Texans jumped out early to a 24-0 lead, but managed to find a way to blow that lead. Despite Watson throwing for 388 yards and 2 touchdowns, they lost 31-51. Following a Texans loss to Tennessee in the last game of the season, they would finish 4-12, and it only got stranger. By the end of the month, he would request to be traded after just signing a 4-year, $177 million contract extension. But then all of a sudden, a lawyer named Tony Busby said in an Instagram post that he was filing suit against Watson for alleged misconduct against women, but offered minimal details. In a statement that remains his only public comment on the matter, Watson said that he had yet to see a complaint, but denied ever treating a woman with anything other than the utmost respect. Watson then proceeded to call Busby a publicity-seeking plaintiff's lawyer. So Watson went to go find his own attorney and hired another high-profile Houston attorney in Hardin, who previously represented running back Adrian Peterson in his 2014 child abuse case. But it was strange because he had never had any signs or had any of these types of accusations or actions. And there were early thoughts that maybe the Texans had set the guy up. And due to him just sporadically requesting a trade just a few weeks before these allegations, but that would make too much sense considering they still would have to trade the guy.
The way it affects trade value is if there's an NFL investigation. They're not at a stage where I think they're doing anything, and they may never do anything. They may just view it as a civil matter that they don't want to address.
And they didn't want to taint his reputation, so it didn't make much sense. But neither did trading DeAndre Hopkins for beans and rice. So it was a possibility. But then it got worse just one day later.
Deshaun Watson assaulted and harassed me on March 30th, 2020.
Ashley Solis was the first woman to file a civil lawsuit against the NFL star.
I got into massage therapy to heal people. Deshaun Watson has robbed me of that.
And then the next day, 4 new cases. Everything was moving at such a fast pace, but for the better part, Deshaun had a fighting chance still and could clear his name. But once details had surfaced about what had happened, it wasn't looking good. And what made it clear to everyone, including myself, about Watson was the way Watson responded to these things.
I mean, I don't have any regrets. Like I said before,
more and more women just kept coming out, and the number had risen to 22 women filing against Watson. And I mean, some of these reports are just downright wrong and inappropriate.
He deliberately grabs himself and put his on my hand, and I pulled my hand away instantly, and I started crying, and I told him that I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore.
One suit even alleges Watson roped the woman, touched her hand with his hard you-know-what, and told her he would not pay her unless she signed a non-disclosure agreement. I mean, this is just some really disturbing stuff. Two women even came out to the public. Ashley Solis, who filed the first suit against Watson, she read a prepared statement while seated next to Busby. And Laura Baxley, who had written a letter to Watson that was read by an associate of Busby's law firm. All other plaintiffs had been kept anonymous in complaints up to this point. And Watson's lawyer, Hardin, had accused Busby of withholding their identities to impede investigations into these allegations.
Is she lying?
I'm not going to use the word because
What word would you use?
she didn't tell the truth.
Did all 22 women not tell the truth?
Depends on what part of it.
But both women accused Watson of inappropriately exposing himself and touching them, which aligned with what all the other women had been saying as well. Shortly after the news conference, though, Hardin's office released a statement claiming Busby sought a $100,000 settlement from Watson on Solis's behalf before she filed her civil lawsuit. And at this point, it was pretty clear that the dude was guilty. But to what severity was he? Most people were convinced that he would and should receive some type of punishment. And for starters, Watson lost countless sponsors as they would drop him for making these headlines. Sponsors as big as Nike and Reliant Energy had all said they were all aware of the current accusations and would not be engaging with him or his team until further notice. Fast forward to April 29th now, the NFL draft is just days away. It has been over a full month since the allegations were made. And now, just now, the NFL and Roger Goodell decide to make a statement on all of this. And all Goodell could say is, and I quote, "We're obviously following that and looking at that ourselves independently. There are important steps that we will be taking as part of our personal conduct policy. When we get to that point, we will certainly make a decision." And needless to say, that just didn't sit right with a lot of people. But that's okay, because the NFL was working hard and was going to make sure that they got this resolved quick and gave Watson the proper punishment. Wrong. Watson was able to report to Texans training camp on the 25th and participated in practice on the 28th, but was still requesting a trade. It had now been over 7 months since the first allegations were made, and there still had been no punishment or any word about what would happen with Watson. The FBI had spoken to him in mid-August, and the season had already started, but up to this point, Watson had been ruled out for every Texans game on the non-injury list. And despite all this news, teams were still in pursuit of this quarterback. Most notably, the Dolphins were considered the frontrunners, but teams like the Eagles and Panthers were in the mix as well.
We've been waiting for days to find out where Deshaun Watson is headed. I bring in Ian Rappaport, NFL Network insider. Ian, where is Deshaun going next?
Deshaun Watson is expected to be a member of the Cleveland Browns.
Oh, and yes, on top of this, in June of 2022, was now facing not only 22 charges anymore, but a total of 24 after 2 more women had come out. And despite publicly saying that he worked with about 40 massage therapists, Watson booked massage appointments with 66 women from 2019 through 2021. The report contained accounts from some of those therapists that suggested the quarterback engaged in questionable behavior when seeking massages. And again, just like some of the others, according to the report, Watson asked several of the therapists to sign an NDA he received from the Texans staff member. And in his deposition, he said the team arranged for some of the massages to happen at a place known as the Houstonian, a hotel and spa in Houston, which made it even worse for the NFL now, because with the Texans being mentioned, the women could now add the Texans to this for facilitating Watson's behavior. And speaking to reporters for the first time since March 26th,
massages with 66 different women over a 17-month period. Does that number 66 seem right to you?
I mean, I can answer. I don't think so for what me and my attorneys went through. But at the same time, you know, that's more of a legal question that I can't really get into details about.
And with it now being July, and in wake of all of this, the Texans had settled with all of the women in the charges after being roped in. And now just 7 days after the Texans had settled with all of these women, he would settle with 20 of the 24 different lawsuits. But the NFL still was waiting to name what they would do. But before they could step in, the Browns would try to handle it on their own and suspend him for 6 games. 6 games. Like, what the hell? A dude just got suspended for gambling longer than a dude that was getting accused of this type of stuff. Huh? And needless to say, people all over Twitter were pissed about the length of this suspension. The NFL was seeking at least a year suspension, and when this didn't happen, the NFL appealed this due to it being so much further from what they were seeking. But it's a little bit more complex. Now, yes, Goodell could have maintained being the judge and executioner of this and made the final decision, but a judge named by Sue Robinson had some say with her findings as well. In her findings, she found out that he was using a small Gatorade towel rather than a long towel that massage places typically use. And on top of this, he usually only had them focus on an area that would induce erections. And on top of this, most of the time made it seem like he was going for a sexual reason. But the scariest part is it seemed like he would prey on the more unexperienced type of therapists, and none of these therapists would ever book him for a second session. And Robinson even said herself that this was predatory, the most egregious of his kind, and that he was worthy of something. So yes, she did agree he was guilty, but under the non-violent crime section, which typically they get suspended for 3 games. So she thought 6 games would be more than enough since it is doubling it.
Hey, look, I'm just taking sort of samples of what you've done before with other players. Ben Roethlisberger, Ezekiel Elliott. These are all policies. These are all punishments. So she's sort of following the guidelines there. Now, she did have some language where, non-violent sexual assault. It's still sexual assault.
I mean, yes, technically she was doubling the normal amount, but he had over 20 cases against him and only got 3 extra games to the suspension. But this was all just a big ploy to give Goodell the authority to do what he had wanted with the punishment. And to everyone's surprise, he had asked a specialist, Peter Harvey, to come in and help with the decision. Now, while you may be wondering how he can do that, due to the rules of the 2020 CBA, Commissioner Roger Goodell had the choice to hear over the appeal himself or appoint someone else. He chose Harvey.
I'm not surprised he handed it off, but Roger taking that appeal and making that decision is just an easy avenue for the league to get that 1 year.
Who served as a federal prosecutor with his expertise in criminal law, including domestic violence and sexual assault, and had helped on numerous NFL cases, most notably the Ezekiel Elliott one. And with all of this looming, the dude was still allowed to practice with the Browns, get paid, and was about to get the nod to get the start for the Browns. But finally, just while everyone had their eyes on the case, the NFL had come out and made a statement.
Tonight, Cleveland Browns star quarterback Deshaun Watson's fate sealed by the NFL. He will sit out the season's first 11 games without pay, is being fined $5 million, and must commit to mandatory evaluation and treatment.
And he had not played in a regular season game since the 2020 season. And yes, while it wasn't a full season suspension, people were still outraged, and for good reason. They had all this evidence, but still couldn't give him a full year or longer. But a guy that just bet on his own team deserves a year-long suspension without pay? All right, nice. And now, even less than a year ago, in October of 2022, there's a new woman coming out and saying he tried to pressure her into sexual activities, bringing his amount of cases up to 26. And yes, last year after his 11-game suspension was over, Watson did make his regular season debut for the Browns in Houston against the Texans, his former team in 2022.
Former Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson of sexual misconduct planned to be at the game at NRG on Sunday. Now, when Watson and the Cleveland Browns face the Texans here in Houston, attorney Tony Busby says about 10 of the accusers will attend the game to make a statement and remind people they are still here and that they matter.
Watson had sat out the entire 2021 season while being paid his full salary and waiting for the Texans to trade him, even with all these looming charges and cases. Many fans made sure to express their thoughts on the matter when he showed up for that game. Now, be it as you may and what you think about the guy or whose side you pick, the choices he made and put these people through, without a doubt, is wrong and shouldn't be taken lightly. And although he will be starting the season for the Browns in his first full season, will always have these terrible actions attached to his name no matter how great he becomes.